I had everything the world told me to chase. Millions in the bank, an empire I built with my bare hands, and the power to buy anything I wanted. But the night I stood on my penthouse balcony staring at the glittering city below, I felt more empty than when I had absolutely nothing. Success had become my prison, and I didn't even realize I was locked inside until Jesus showed me the key I'd been ignoring my entire life.
I remember the exact moment I decided that money would solve everything. I was 12 years old, sitting at the top of our apartment stairs, listening to my mother sob in the kitchen below. The bills were spread across our worn table like accusations, and her voice cracked as she whispered into the phone, begging the landlord for more time. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block out her desperation. That night, I made myself a promise. I would never be powerless like that. I would never let money control my life. I would control it instead. By the time I turned 35, I'd kept that promise in ways my 12-year-old self could never have imagined. I'd built a tech consulting empire from scratch, starting in a cramped studio apartment with nothing but a laptop and relentless ambition. The company was now worth over $10 million. I had 3 luxury cars sitting in a private garage, a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a reputation that made investors return my calls within minutes. I'd worked 100-hour weeks for 15 years straight, missing birthdays, holidays, and every relationship that tried to anchor me to something beyond spreadsheets and profit margins. My calendar was full, but my life was empty. Every victory felt like crossing a finish line that immediately moved further away. I'd close a deal, feel a brief rush of accomplishment, and then the hollowness would return, deeper, darker, more demanding. I filled the silence with noise. Expensive restaurants where I ate alone, exclusive clubs where I drank with people whose names I'd forget by morning, penthouse parties where laughter echoed off walls that had never heard genuine joy. The nights were the worst. I'd pour myself another glass of whiskey, stand at those massive windows, and watch the city pulse with life below. Millions of people down there, living their small, ordinary lives, and somehow they seemed more alive than I felt. I had everything they wanted, and I would have traded it all to feel whatever it was they had that I'd lost along the way. The applause at business conferences rang hollow in my chest. The congratulations felt like mockery. I'd built an empire, but I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt genuinely happy. My assistant, Jennifer, once asked me why I never took vacations. I told her I didn't need them. The truth was, I was terrified of stopping, because when the noise died down and the distractions faded, I'd have to face the question that haunted me in the quiet moments. What was I actually building all of this for? And I had no answer that satisfied the ache in my soul. The panic attack hit me on what should have been the greatest day of my career. I was in a conference room on the 42nd floor, surrounded by executives in tailored suits, closing a $3 million contract that would expand my company into 3 new markets. The CEO was shaking my hand, photographers were capturing the moment, and champagne glasses were being raised in my honor. Then suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened like someone had wrapped steel cables around my ribs and was pulling them tighter with each second. The room tilted sideways. Voices became muffled, distant, like I was underwater. I excused myself, stumbling toward the bathroom, my vision tunneling into pinpricks of light. I locked myself in a stall and collapsed against the cold tile wall, gasping for air that wouldn't come, convinced I was dying at 35 in a luxury office building surrounded by people celebrating my success. My doctor said it was stress and wrote me a prescription for anxiety medication. My therapist, a calm woman with an expensive degree and a soothing voice, said I needed better work-life balance, as if I could simply schedule happiness between board meetings. But neither of them could explain what happened next. The dreams that began haunting me every single night. In these dreams, I was standing in a vast, empty space, and someone was there with me. I never saw his face clearly, but his presence was overwhelming. His eyes held something I'd never encountered, infinite love mixed with unbearable truth. He didn't speak, but somehow I knew he was asking me a question I couldn't answer. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than I'd felt since childhood. The dreams were so vivid, so real, that my waking life started to feel like the illusion. I began avoiding mirrors. The man staring back at me was a stranger. Hollow eyes, tight jaw, shoulders perpetually tensed like I was bracing for impact. My reflection looked successful, polished, powerful, but I could see the truth beneath the expensive suits and confident posture. I was empty, utterly, completely empty. It all came to a head one morning at 4 a.m. Jennifer, my assistant, had come into the office early to prepare for a presentation and found me still there from the night before. I was sitting in my office chair, staring at my computer screen, but I hadn't touched the keyboard in hours. I was just sitting there frozen, unable to remember why any of it mattered. Jennifer walked in quietly and stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "Marcus," she said, and her voice carried a concern that broke through my fog. "When's the last time you were actually happy?" I opened my mouth to answer, to deflect with some witty response about happiness being overrated or success requiring sacrifice. But nothing came out, because I genuinely couldn't remember, not a single moment, not one instance of pure, uncomplicated joy in the last decade. Maybe longer. I'd been so busy climbing, achieving, winning, that I'd forgotten what I was climbing toward. That question echoed in my mind for weeks afterward, haunting me worse than the dreams. When's the last time you were actually happy? I had no answer, and that terrified me more than any business failure ever could. The invitation came from David, my old college roommate, someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 8 years. We'd been close once, back when life was simpler and success was still just a dream we talked about over cheap pizza and cheaper beer. He'd taken a different path, became a high school teacher, married his college sweetheart, had 3 kids. I'd always thought he'd settled for less. Now, I wasn't so sure who had settled for what. His text message was simple. "Hey Marcus, I know it's been forever. Would love to catch up. Maybe you could come to church with me this Sunday. No pressure, just thought of you." Church, I almost laughed. I hadn't been to church since my mother dragged me as a kid, sitting in uncomfortable pews while some preacher droned on about rules and judgment. But something in me, maybe desperation, maybe curiosity, maybe the ghost of that recurring dream, made me say yes. I told myself it was just to see David, to reconnect with someone from a simpler time. But deep down, I think I knew I was searching for something I couldn't name. That Sunday, I drove to an address in a neighborhood I'd never have visited otherwise. The church was modest, almost plain. A simple brick building with a wooden cross out front, nothing like the grand cathedrals I'd imagined wealthy people attended. The parking lot was full of minivans and old sedans. I felt ridiculous pulling up in my Mercedes, like I was wearing a tuxedo to a barbecue. David met me at the door with a genuine smile and a hug that lasted longer than I was comfortable with. He didn't ask about my business or comment on my car. He just seemed genuinely happy to see me. We sat together near the middle, and I tried to blend in, standing when others stood, sitting when they sat, like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. Then the pastor started speaking, and everything shifted. He was talking about a story from the Bible, about a rich young ruler who came to Jesus asking what he needed to do to inherit eternal life. Jesus told him to sell everything and follow him. And the man walked away sad because he had great wealth. The pastor wasn't yelling or condemning. His voice was gentle, almost compassionate. But his words cut through me like a surgical knife finding exactly where the infection lived. "This story isn't about money," the pastor said, looking around the room like he could see into each person's soul. "It's about what we worship. It's about the idols we build and then serve, thinking they'll give us life, when they're actually slowly killing us. Jesus wasn't asking that young man to become poor. He was asking him to become free. I felt exposed, like someone had pulled back a curtain I didn't even know was hiding me. Every defense I'd built, every justification I'd crafted for my lifestyle, it all crumbled in that moment. I wasn't just successful, I was owned. Owned by the pursuit, by the numbers, by the need to prove I was worth something because of what I'd accumulated. Money hadn't freed me from my mother's poverty. It had become a different kind of prison, one with golden bars I'd built myself. After the service ended, I couldn't move. People filed out around me, shaking hands, laughing, making lunch plans. David touched my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I nodded, lying, and told him I'd catch up with him later. Then I sat there alone in that simple church until everyone had gone. Eventually, I walked to my car and just sat behind the wheel. For 2 hours, I didn't turn the key. I didn't check my phone. I just sat there as something inside me finally broke open. And for the first time in 20 years, I prayed. Not the memorized childhood prayers my mother taught me, not the desperate bargaining I'd done during business crises. This was different, raw, honest. "If you're real," I whispered into the empty car, my voice cracking, "show me what I'm missing. Show me what I've been running from." And in the silence that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the adrenaline rush of closing a deal or the temporary numbness of another drink. Real peace. Quiet, persistent, like finally hearing a song I'd been deaf to my entire life. It didn't fix everything. It didn't answer all my questions. But it was enough to make me want to come back, enough to make me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I'd been searching for the wrong kind of treasure all along. The next 6 months dismantled everything I thought I knew about myself. I started going back to that simple brick church every Sunday, then Wednesday nights, then whenever the doors were open. David gave me a Bible, and I read it with the same intensity I'd once poured over market analyses and business strategies. But this was different. These words weren't teaching me how to build an empire. They were showing me how hollow my empire had been. I learned that Jesus didn't die for successful people or good people or people who had it all together. He died for broken people, proud people, people like me who'd spent their entire lives trying to prove they were worthy, only to discover that worthiness was never something we could earn. It was a gift, freely given, that I'd been too arrogant to accept. The truth hit me hardest one night when I was reading about the prodigal son, the young man who demanded his inheritance, wasted it all, and came home expecting to be treated as a servant. But his father ran to him, embraced him, threw a party for him. Not because he deserved it, but because he was loved. I realized I'd been like that son my entire life, except I'd never come home. I'd just kept running, kept achieving, kept trying to earn something that was already mine if I'd only turn around and accept it. My business didn't disappear. The money didn't vanish. But my grip on them loosened. I started asking different questions in my morning routine. Not how can I make more, but how can I give more? Not what will this achieve for me, but who can this serve? The shift felt seismic, like rebuilding a house from the foundation up while still living inside it. I used my wealth differently. I funded rehab programs for people fighting addiction, remembering all those nights I'd tried to numb my own pain with alcohol. I started mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, kids who reminded me of my 12-year-old self listening to my mother cry over bills. I set up a foundation to support single mothers, women like my mom who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. Each act of generosity didn't diminish me. It expanded me, filled spaces I didn't know were hollow. My business actually grew. But I was no longer defined by its growth. I hired people who shared my new values. I turned down contracts that would have made millions, but required compromising integrity. I started leaving the office at reasonable hours. I reconnected with old friends. I called my mother more often and actually listened when she talked. I discovered that life existed outside the narrow tunnel I'd been sprinting through for 15 years. The transformation wasn't instant or easy. There were days I fell back into old patterns, days when the fear of losing everything gripped me again. But David and my new church community were there, reminding me that my identity wasn't in my bank account or my reputation. It was in being loved by a God who'd been pursuing me, even when I was running in the opposite direction. The night everything finally clicked, I was alone in my penthouse again, the same spot where I'd stood so many times feeling empty. But this time was different. I'd been reading the Gospel of John, and I came across the verse where Jesus said, "I have come that they may have life, and have it to the full." And suddenly I understood. The abundant life he promised wasn't about having more things. It was about being more whole. I wept that night in a way money had never allowed. I wept for all the years I'd wasted chasing shadows. I wept for the relationships I'd sacrificed on the altar of success. I wept because I finally understood that Jesus had died for someone as broken and proud as me, and his love wasn't contingent on my achievements or my bank balance. He loved me when I had nothing, and he loved me now that I had everything. The only thing that had changed was my willingness to accept it. I'm still wealthy by the world's standards. I still run a successful company. I still live in that penthouse with the incredible view. But now I know what true riches are, and they can't be deposited in any bank. They can't be measured in quarterly reports or displayed in a luxury car showroom. True riches are found in surrender, in purpose beyond profit, in loving and being loved without condition. My conversion wasn't about religion. It wasn't about following rules or joining a club or becoming a different person. It was about finally finding the one my soul had been searching for in all the wrong places. The hunger that drove me to build a $10 million empire was actually a hunger for God, and I'd been trying to satisfy it with things that could never fill a God-shaped void. Now, when people ask me about success, I tell them the truth. I spent 15 years climbing a ladder only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. Jesus didn't condemn my success. He redeemed it, repurposed it, and showed me what it was actually meant for. And that has made all the difference.